There was no press conference, no dramatic breaking news alert, no leaked text or viral Twitter thread. Just a roster release that landed on a quiet February morning. And when the names scrolled down that list, one absence sent a shockwave through the entire world of women's basketball. A'ja Wilson, 4-time MVP, 3-time WNBA champion, the most decorated player in the history of the league. Not on it. And stepping into the space she left behind, not just on the roster, but running the entire show, was Caitlyn Clark. The 23-year-old from Iowa who had already rewritten every meaningful record in college basketball. Now, coming off 8 months of injury recovery. Now, making her senior national team debut. Now being handed, on the global stage, the exact platform that Wilson had spent nearly a decade building piece by piece.
Misfires, Plum beats Johannes on the glass, and Wilson cleans it up.
This is not a simple story about a roster decision. Those happen every year. Veterans get rested, rotations evolve, coaches make tough calls. That is normal. What is not normal is what lies underneath this particular decision. Because when you trace everything that led to that February morning in 2026, what you find is a story about jealousy, miscalculation, ego, and the brutal reality of what happens when you spend years treating your greatest opportunity as your biggest threat. This is the story of how one of the greatest players women's basketball has ever produced watched her empire quietly get handed to someone else, and how every choice she made along the way helped make that outcome not just possible, but inevitable.
She got another second three of the quarter for Caitlyn Clark.
If you're new here and you want honest, no-filter breakdowns of the real stories happening in women's basketball right now, hit that subscribe button before we go any further. You're going to want to be around for where this goes. Now let us start at the beginning. To understand the weight of this fall, you need to understand exactly how high A'ja Wilson was standing before any of this started. Go back to 2022. Picture Wilson at the absolute height of her powers and understand that using the word height is not poetic exaggeration. She had already won 2 MVP awards at a point in her career when most players are still fighting for a starting rotation spot. She had championship rings with the Las Vegas Aces. She had endorsement deals. She had magazine covers. She had television analysts describing her, without hesitation, as the greatest player of her generation, and nobody in the basketball world was seriously challenging that claim. She was not just the best player in the WNBA. She was what the WNBA sold itself on. Her face was the face of Team USA, the face of the franchise, the face of women's basketball in America. When sponsors wanted an ambassador, Wilson was the call. When the league needed a representative for the biggest moments, Wilson was the answer. The entire infrastructure of attention and investment in the sport had organized itself, in large part, around her.
Wilson in the paint, met by Jones. Wilson flips it.
By the time 2025 ended, the resume had become something that her critics could not honestly dismiss. 4 MVP trophies, a number no other player in league history had reached. 3 championship rings with the Las Vegas Aces. And then the 2025 season, which delivered something that had never been done before in WNBA history. Wilson swept the regular season MVP, the finals MVP, and the Defensive Player of the Year award in a single campaign. A complete, historic triple crown that proved she was operating at a level the sport had simply never seen in a single season.
Congratulations. Watch out, it's heavy.
We didn't dig, but we got MVP.
On paper, that resume is untouchable. There is no reasonable argument that places anyone above her when you align the accomplishment side by side. She earned all of it. She worked for every single piece of it, and the sport had rewarded her in every way it knew how. The problem was never the resume. The problem was what started happening inside her mind when something outside her control began to shift. Caitlyn Clark did not arrive quietly. She did not ease in through a side door, work patiently through the system, or wait her turn the way the game's traditional gatekeepers expected. She detonated into the public conversation like nothing women's basketball had ever seen, and the shockwave hit every corner of the sport at the same time. The numbers from her college career were almost fictional. She rewrote the all-time NCAA scoring record, men's or women's. And she did it with a brand of basketball so entertaining and so visually electric that people who had never once watched a women's game were suddenly watching. Arenas selling out weeks in advance. television ratings shattering records the WNBA had been chasing for 15 years. Highlights dominating every major platform because it turns out you physically cannot scroll past a 35-foot three-pointer launched over a defender and absolutely buried with the confidence of someone who has never once in her life doubted herself. When she came into the WNBA in 2024, the momentum did not slow. It accelerated. Games featuring Clark were pulling television numbers that made league executives look at each other in disbelief. The Indiana Fever, who had not been a marquee draw in years, became one of the hottest tickets in sports almost overnight. Casual fans, people who had never cared about the WNBA, never tracked a single game, never thought about women's basketball for even a moment, were suddenly planning their evenings around tip-off times. This was a cultural moment, a genuine, once-in-a-generation surge of attention toward a sport that had been deserving it for decades. The smart play, the obvious play for anyone who actually loved the game, was to celebrate it, to recognize that a rising tide lifts every boat in the water, to understand that Clark's popularity was delivering millions of new eyes and millions of new dollars into a league that desperately needed both. But Aya Wilson did not see a rising tide. She saw a wave aimed directly at her. When Clark signed her Nike deal in 2024, a deal that industry insiders described as jumping the line in terms of scale compared to the agreements veterans had negotiated, Wilson's response was immediate. She posted a Bible verse on social media about patience when others find success. She never named Clark. She did not need to. The timing was a billboard. When Time magazine named Clark its Athlete of the Year for 2024, an honor that should have been a victory for every woman who had ever competed in this league. Wilson's response was not celebration. It was cryptic commentary laced with visible skepticism. She started using phrases in interviews, things like sustained excellence, real impact, and what the game actually demands, that were transparently designed to draw a line between herself and the younger player. Throwback content celebrating her own achievements started surfacing at moments clearly timed to compete for attention with Clark's biggest milestones. None of it was subtle. None of it went unnoticed. Not by fans, not by media, and definitely not by the people inside USA Basketball whose job it was to evaluate who would represent this country on the world stage. Here is something anyone who has ever watched a high-stakes competition understands at a gut level. Jealousy cannot be hidden forever. You can manage it for a while. You can dress it up in careful language and time social media posts and interviews crafted to sound philosophical rather than bitter. But eventually it leaks. And once it starts leaking, it tends to pour. For Wilson, the leak became a flood in December 2025 when she sat down for a high-profile interview and told the world that the history of black women in the WNBA had been erased, at least for a moment, by the narrative surrounding Caitlyn Clark's rise. Now this situation does not have clean edges, and it is important to be honest about that. Wilson was raising a point that carries real weight. The generations of black athletes who built the WNBA from nothing, who played in near-empty arenas for salaries that would not cover a month's rent in a major city, who fought for recognition that barely came, who gave everything to a league the mainstream often treated as an afterthought. Those women absolutely deserve to be honored. That history matters. That conversation deserves serious, thoughtful space. The problem was not the message. The problem was what the message revealed about the state of the person delivering it. Because Caitlyn Clark, when Time honored her in 2024, had used that platform not to talk about herself. She named names. She gave credit. She explicitly acknowledged the largely black pioneers who built the foundation she was standing on. She did not center herself in that moment. She pointed backward toward history with what every person in the room described as genuine sincerity. And Wilson's response to that tribute was to publicly state that the history was being erased anyway. That gap between what Clark actually said and how Wilson chose to frame it told the coaches at USA Basketball something important. It told them that Wilson had reached a point where facts no longer mattered as much as the narrative she had constructed inside her own head. A narrative in which Clark's success was always a personal insult, always a threat, always a diminishment of everything Wilson had legitimately earned. And coaches file that kind of thing away. They never forget it. Here is where things get into territory that mainstream basketball coverage almost never addresses honestly, because everyone is comfortable discussing Aya Wilson's dominance, and nobody wants to say what the film actually shows. On the surface, her statistical output is extraordinary. The free throw volume alone looks like the hallmark of an unstoppable force. But insiders in the basketball world have a name for what drives those numbers. They call it the special whistle. And when you understand what that means, the picture changes dramatically. Watch Wilson work in a typical WNBA game, and what you actually see is a player who has mastered the art of initiating marginal contact and selling it to officials with theatrical precision. Every drive to the basket ends with an exaggerated motion. Every defensive contest, no matter how minimal the contact, produces an appeal for a call. Her scoring output is not built purely on skill. A meaningful portion of it is built on a steady, reliable stream of favorable officiating that is a feature, not a bug, of how the WNBA protects its star players. Inside that system, it works beautifully. The rules favor offensive players. The referees know who the stars are. The league rewards this style of play. But FIBA referees do not care about your MVP trophies or your Instagram following. They officiate a game where physical defense is not merely permitted, it is expected. The kind of contact that sends Wilson to the free throw line a dozen times in a WNBA game earns nothing more than a play-on signal on the international stage. Team USA scouts had watched Wilson in international exhibition settings, and what they saw was alarming. Her scoring efficiency did not just dip when physical defense was allowed. It collapsed. Her entire offensive rhythm depends on constant stoppages and favorable calls that simply never materialize at the FIBA level. Now compare that to how Caitlyn Clark scores. She hits shots from 30 feet that no referee on any continent can take away from her. She finishes through contact instead of seeking it. Her step-back threes and deep-range pull-ups are products of shot-making ability, basketball intelligence, and footwork, not whistle hunting. Her game travels because it is built entirely on pure, undeniable skill. You cannot take away a pull-up three launch from 33 feet with 4 seconds on a shot clock. That belongs to her completely. And in San Juan, she proved it on the biggest stage available to her. When USA Basketball released the 12-player roster for the 2026 FIBA Women's World Cup qualifying tournament in February, the names told a story all by themselves. Caitlyn Clark was on it. Angel Reese was on it. Paige Buchers was on it. Olympic gold medalist Kalia Copper, Chelsea Gray, Kelsey Plum, and Jackie Young were on it. Aya Wilson was not. Neither was Breanna Stewart. Now, before anyone frames this purely as a rest decision, understand the full context, because the two absences were not treated the same way at all. Breanna Stewart, yes, was officially listed as resting, but Stewart flew to Miami and participated in a 2-day pre-tournament training camp on March 7th and 8th. She was mentoring the younger players. She was present. She was in the building, connected to the program, contributing in the ways available to her while stepping back from active competition. She was resting, but still invested, still there, still part of the team. Aya Wilson was nowhere near the program. No camp appearance, no mentoring, no visible connection to a team preparing to carry the American flag into international competition. The contrast between those two situations, one graceful, one completely absent, was not lost on anyone paying attention. And then came the reaction. According to sources familiar with the situation, Wilson's response when she learned her name was not on the list was not graceful acceptance or quiet determination to prove the selectors wrong. It was explosive. The woman who had spent years convinced of her own untouchability discovered in a single moment that the exact player she had worked so hard to undermine was being handed the platform she believed permanently belonged to her. Frantic calls went out to anyone inside USA Basketball who might offer an explanation or a reversal. Her representatives pushed for emergency meetings with a coaching staff that had already moved forward entirely and was focused on preparing the players who made the cut. Stories started appearing in the press about scheduling conflicts that had supposedly kept Wilson away, as if the decision had been hers rather than theirs. Nobody bought it. Everyone with any familiarity with this situation understood exactly what was happening. The face-saving narrative only made things worse. Meanwhile, in San Juan, Caitlyn Clark was doing what she does. She was not posting anything. She was not demanding explanations. She was not floating stories through intermediaries. She was playing basketball. And that contrast, one player filling every quiet moment with noise, the other saying nothing because she was too busy performing, told the Real's story louder than any press release could. Let's talk about what Caitlyn Clark actually walked into in San Juan, because the context makes what she did there even more remarkable. She had not played a competitive basketball game in 239 days. Her 2025 WNBA season had been an injury nightmare. A left quad strain early in the year, a left groin strain midseason, and then on July 15th, a right groin injury that ended her season entirely after just 13 appearances. She missed the playoffs. She missed the All-Star game. She sat and healed while the league moved forward without her. And she did all of it publicly in front of an audience that was watching her every update. And here is the part that Aya Wilson really did not want to have to absorb. Even without Clark on the court, WNBA viewership on ESPN networks rose 5% across both the regular season and postseason in 2025, the highest numbers in league history. The game had been elevated. The audience was not going anywhere, and everyone understood that the moment Clark returned healthy, the conversation would reach a level that even the record-breaking 2024 season had not prepared anyone for. On March 11th, Clark walked onto the floor against Senegal in her very first senior national team game. She had not competed in 8 months. She was stepping into a FIBA environment for the first time at this level. Every possible excuse for a slow start existed, and she used none of them. 17 points, 12 assists, 19 minutes. The second most assists ever recorded in a FIBA Women's World Cup qualifying game, in under 20 minutes. Coming back from 239 days away from competitive basketball. That is not a player finding their footing. That is a player whose talent operates at a level that no amount of rust, no change in officiating philosophy, and no adjustment in environment can suppress. The tournament unfolded from there with a kind of clarity that felt almost inevitable. Team USA went 5-0, outscoring opponents by an average of 42 points per game. Clark led the entire tournament in assists. She shot 52.9% from the field and 40% from three. The United States versus Great Britain game became the most watched non-final game in the tournament's history. Not by accident, not by some algorithmic quirk, but because the Caitlyn Clark effect operates the same way at every level and on every stage. When a final game closed out Spain 84-70 to complete the perfect run, head coach Kara Lawson's team had made one thing undeniable. And USA Basketball handed Clark the Tizot Tournament MVP award, not as a marketing gesture, not as a popularity contest, as a recognition of the simple, verified fact that she was the best player on a team full of elite talent. On a stage where FIBA rules stripped away every advantage the WNBA's domestic system provides to players who have built their game around it. If this is the kind of real breakdown you have been looking for, leave a comment and let us know what story you want covered next. The comments drive what gets made here. Seriously. International competition at the highest level operates on a different frequency than anything these players experience domestically. It is not about statistics or trophies or the number of times your name appears in a record book. It is about handling crushing pressure when an entire nation is watching and expecting results. It is about maintaining composure when hostile crowds are loud in languages you do not speak and referees are making calls that feel designed to work against you. It is about representing your country with dignity when cameras from around the world are capturing your every expression, your every moment of frustration, your every reaction to adversity. The Olympic stage magnifies everything. It exposes weaknesses that domestic competition quietly buries. And most importantly, it reveals the true character of every athlete who steps onto that court wearing their country's colors. A player who cannot handle fan criticism on social media, who visibly spirals when strangers question accomplishments she has genuinely earned, is not someone you hand the psychological weight of American basketball on the global stage. A player who responds to a competitor's success with barely concealed resentment instead of professional unity is not someone you want in your locker room when the pressure has never been higher and the cameras have never been more numerous. The coaching staff at USA Basketball understood this. They had seen what happens when toxic attitudes enter high-pressure international environments. They knew from experience how fast one destructive presence can corrode the chemistry of a team that should have been unstoppable. And Wilson had given them all the evidence they needed. Not on the court, off it. The Time magazine comments were the loudest signal, but they were part of a longer pattern. The passive-aggressive social media timing, the loaded interview language, the way she had consistently and publicly turned every Caitlyn Clark achievement into a referendum on her own legacy. All of it added up to a portrait of someone who had stopped being able to separate personal ego from professional responsibility. Coaches need players who can check their individual narratives at the door and focus entirely on what serves the group. They need athletes who can celebrate teammates, elevate the room, and deliver under the kind of pressure that breaks most people. Wilson's track record said she would have made San Juan about herself. Clark's track record, and now her actual performance in international competition, said the exact opposite. And by all accounts, this was not a close call. What happened in San Juan was not just a tournament result. It was a blueprint for what comes next. The chemistry that Clark built with Angel Reese and Paige Buchers throughout that week pointed toward something that Wilson's presence never would have allowed to develop. These three players came into the program with years of intense collegiate rivalry behind them, battles in packed arenas where they had been trying to beat each other's teams into the ground. And when they stood on the same side for the first time, that shared competitive fire translated into an on-court cohesion that was immediately and obviously visible. Reese averaged 8 rebounds per game across the tournament. Buchers led the team in steals. Clark ran the offense with the kind of unselfish vision that makes every player around her better, finishing as the tournament's leading assist provider while simultaneously being one of its most efficient scorers. There was no hierarchy, no ego demanding the system revolve around individual numbers. Just a group of supremely talented young women playing for each other and delivering exactly when a moment called for it. That is what the next chapter of this program looks like. The 2026 FIBA Women's World Cup in Berlin this September will be the first showcase of this new generation on one of the biggest stages women's basketball has ever occupied. And beyond Berlin, there is 2028 in Los Angeles, a home Olympics in front of a home crowd, with the chance to win gold in the most watched setting the sport has ever had access to. The roadmap is clear. The names on it are clear. And Aya Wilson's name is no longer written there in A. Here is the thing that goes beyond roster spots and tournaments. Wilson's approach over the past 2 years focused on protecting an existing audience. She catered to a base that already watched, already cared, already knew her name. Clark's approach builds something entirely different. It pulls in people who have never watched a WNBA game, never tracked a World Cup qualifier, never once thought about women's basketball, until something about the way Clark plays made it impossible to look away. In a sport that is still fighting for every new viewer and every new sponsorship dollar, that difference is not marginal. It is existential. The United States versus Great Britain game, becoming the most watched non-final game in the entire tournament's history, was not an accident. That is the Caitlyn Clark effect operating on a global stage, exactly where Team USA needs it most. And everyone inside the program knows it. They are building around it deliberately and without apology. Wilson may still carry the most decorated resume in this sport's history, but Clark has the future. And in sports, the future has never once waited around for the past to finish grieving. Power does not collapse with noise. It moves in silence, in decisions made behind closed doors, in roster releases that land on quiet mornings, in the cold professional logic of coaching staffs who are building for a future that has no obligation to honor the past simply because the past was brilliant. What happened to Aya Wilson was not just a roster omission. It was a signal, a recalibration of value, of what it means to lead, to represent, to carry a sport forward in an era where every word and every reaction is being studied more closely than most athletes ever realize. And the conclusion that signal sent was not about trophies or championships or any of the extraordinary things Wilson legitimately earned over her career. It was about who she decided to become in the years after Caitlyn Clark arrived. Because here is the truth that this entire story comes back to. Aya Wilson made a choice. She chose to treat a colleague as an enemy. She chose to transform another player's success into a personal wound rather than a collective win for a sport she claims to love. She chose ego over unity, and she made that choice consistently, publicly, over the course of multiple years. And that track record, not her 4 MVPs, not her 3 rings, is what cost her the stage. Standing on the other side of all of this is Caitlyn Clark, not demanding attention, not calculating her next move in a status competition, not planting stories or posting cryptic messages, just playing basketball at a level that keeps redefining what this sport looks like on a global stage. She is not asking for a throne. She is busy changing what the throne even represents. Power like this does not settle in one place. It transfers. It evolves. And once it starts moving, history does not tend to remember the people who stood in its way. It remembers the people who recognized the moment and moved with it. The headlines around San Juan will eventually fade. The debates about roster decisions will eventually cool. But the decisions being made right now will echo into Berlin this September, into Los Angeles in 2028, and into a future that nobody is waiting around for permission to begin. And that right there is what makes this moment so significant. Not a single game, not a single tournament, but the quiet, definitive, unmistakable shifting of weight from one era to the next, happening right now, in real time, in front of all of us. If you made it to the end of this video, you are exactly the kind of viewer this is made for. Hit that subscribe button if you have not yet. There's a lot more where this came from, and drop a comment below telling us whether you think A'ja Wilson can ever rebuild her standing with Team USA, or whether that bridge has been burned for good. We read everything. See you in the next one.